So today we are continuing our series on the six paramitas, which, as you'll recall, we are approaching not as perfections, although that is the most common translation of the word paramita, but as liberating qualities that are already seated within each of us. And so our work throughout this exploration is not to manufacture or construct anything, but to tend the conditions that allow these seeds that are already there to grow. And so far, we've spent time getting to know the first two of these qualities, and we've begun to see how, rather than being like sequential steps or rungs on a ladder, each of these teachings enriches and informs the others. So we began with Dāna, or generosity, and we explored it kind of like a living flow that has a quality of reciprocity. And just like a stream, which was nature's way of demonstrating Dāna to us, generosity can nourish the whole landscape, but only when it is being fed and when its movement is allowed to follow a wise and sustainable course. And then we turn to Sīla, which is often translated as ethical conduct, and which we have been holding as wholeness. So not ethics as rule following, but as a practice of sensing when our inner knowing and our outer life may have kind of drifted apart, and then making small, honest adjustments in the direction of alignment. So Dāna opened the hand and the heart, and Sīla asked us to notice whether our offering is aligned with that core truth. And today, we are turning towards the quality of Kṣānti, which asks us to practice with one of the places that I think truth often becomes the most challenging. And that's the pace and the breadth of things as they actually are. So first things first, the word Kṣānti is most often translated as patience. But as we'll explore, the common understanding of patience is really only the doorway into this teaching. Because Kṣānti points towards something broader and deeper than simply waiting without complaining, okay? And I thought rather than diving straight into patience, I want to begin with an experience I feel unusually confident that we all know well. And I might do something really rare and go so far as to guarantee it. Big words. So just for a moment, you might recall a time when someone or something, or maybe some part of yourself, was not moving in the direction you had hoped at the pace you had in mind. I'll just give you a second to reflect on that. Hopefully you don't have to dig too deep. You know, this can look many ways, and I will share a few common examples from my own extensive repertoire to get us started. So how about, and which each of these just maybe sense in the body how this might feel. How about coming up on gridlock traffic when you're on your way to something important? Okay, so that feeling, squeeze. Or another one that seems fitting in our modern life. Trying to complete a simple task that should only take a moment, and then technology decides to become a spiritual teacher by not working the way you intended. Okay? If you can't relate to that one, please come to my house and teach me your ways, because this is a very common one for me. Or one more. Encountering, yet again, a pattern, and I'll speak for myself here, in myself, that I was very sure I should have grown past by now. Okay, so something, that common thing, and there it is again, that challenging, same old difficulty. And these are just a few examples, of course, but in each of them, what we are coming up against is that uncomfortable, edgy energy of impatience. You know that feeling? Everybody familiar with impatience? Okay. So for me, what this feels like in the body, it's a contracted state of urgency that wants to fix or flee or force or get to the part where things are how I think they should be, essentially. And for many of us, this felt sense of impatience might be a lot more familiar than the other end of the spectrum, than of patience itself. And that's why I actually think this is a useful place to begin. Because if we can learn to recognize impatience as it arises in the body, it can become kind of a bell of mindfulness or something that calls our attention. So, not as a sign that we're failing or as a reason to spiral into self-judgment, but a reliable signal that there's an opportunity to practice Kṣānti, that that's here right now. And in case you aren't already intuiting this from everything I've said so far today, I want to name directly Kṣānti is a quality that I personally find challenging. And I think a lot of us find this challenging. And I will confess that for a long time, I may have been known to say that I have a patience deficiency, right? But with the understanding that we've been holding in this series, I would say this differently now. I am learning to trust that the seed of this quality is in me. And Kṣānti may simply be the paramita for which I most need to practice tending the conditions. And that's totally okay. So if this is challenging, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity, truly. And I think there's a benefit to exploring how we usually understand patience. Because the common definition can miss part of what I think Kṣānti is pointing towards. When many of us think of patience, we may think of waiting or enduring. Maybe that energy of kind of gritting our teeth and just getting through, or holding our breath until the difficult thing passes, or maybe the slow thing speeds up, or the not yet here thing finally arrives. And of course, all of that's necessary. Sometimes we have to wait. Sometimes we need that quality of endurance when things are challenging. But that embodied experience of braced waiting, or that inner resistance while we wait, this is not quite Kṣānti. If we notice the felt sense of that kind of patience, it's actually essentially identical to impatience on the inside, maybe just a little better outward manners as far as how other people experience it. And if you were here for the start of this series, when I introduced all 6 paramitas, I described Kṣānti not as passive endurance, but as a spacious willingness to receive what's difficult without contracting around it, and the capacity to stay present to the pace of things as they actually are. So there's 2 main dimensions inside this quality. There's patience with timing. So this is the one we might be more familiar with. So with growth, with healing, with change, grief, decay, repair, all the ways that life moves in its own time. And there is patience as inclusiveness. And this is how Thich Nhat Hanh often framed Kṣānti. He described it as the capacity to receive and embrace and transform what is difficult. And I find that so helpful because it makes clear that patience is not just about waiting for something to change. It is about the heart and the perspective broadening enough to include what we would rather push away. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to celebrate it, okay, or approve of it, or resign ourselves to things always being that way. But if we can make room to include what's here, something shifts. Pema Chödrön describes patience as the antidote to aggression. And although at first I had a little confusion around that, when I've sat with it, I found this illuminating too, because aggression is not only outward anger, it can also be that inner push against life. That part of us that says, this should be different, or they should be different, or I should be different. And so here's where Kṣānti offers us another possibility. We can include the frustration and the urgency and whatever else is here, and also stay connected to a wider field of care. And this is something that I've had to look at really honestly in myself. So one of the places that this shows up most clearly for me is in my relationship to personal growth and change, especially when it comes to patterns that I've been practicing with for a long time. There is a part of me that seems to kind of chronically want to be farther along. And when that part encounters a challenge, again, that I have sat with, I've inquired into it, maybe I've written about it, I've practiced with it for years, and still, here it comes again. There is real frustration and resistance when that happens. It's like, really? Like, still this? Shouldn't I have moved through this by now? And this is very much a present day practice for me, as much as I wish I could say, back in the old days when I struggled with this, no, even very recently on retreat, this exact thing came up. In that place of greater awareness, I saw a pattern in myself that I had believed I had graduated from. And right away, there was that familiar tightening in my chest. And that very well-known quality of kind of bracing against what felt like an unwelcome visitor. And that same commentary showed up, that really, this again? And as much as some part of me wanted it to be different, it was a teacher for me. Even if it was in kind of an irritating way, it was really useful because I could feel clearly how the, oh, this again, was adding what Buddhism often refers to as the second arrow. So that original tightening, the discomfort, was already uncomfortable when I saw that pattern was there. That was the first arrow, the first ouch. But the resistance to it made it heavier and stickier and achier. So it was like another arrow in that already tender place. And in that moment, the practice of Kṣānti for me was not to become some perfectly equanimous, patient, accepting version of myself, or just to wait it out until what I was seeing wasn't there anymore. The practice was to let that second layer soften and to meet the original difficulty without the added weight of believing that things should be different than they were. Because as my teacher, Tara Brach, would say, this too belongs. It all belongs. And as I share this with you, when I'm not caught in the middle of it, I can see how human this is. I think so many of us carry some kind of inner measurement stick, right? Some sense of how far along we think we should be in our healing, in our relationships, our emotional lives, our careers, maybe our spiritual practice. And that gap between where we actually are and where we think we should be, a whole lot of suffering lives there. So Kṣānti begins perhaps by letting ourselves just be where we are, even when it's not perfect, right? Without making a problem on top of a problem, not because we're giving up on the idea of healing or growth, but because we are allowing ourselves to make room and acknowledge how it is. It's like this right now. And then Kṣānti asks us to widen the lens even further. Because this isn't something that we only practice inwardly. We practice Kṣānti with the full spectrum of life. So with the people that we love and we can't control, which is all of them, much to my disappointment. I've tried a lot of other ways. I've determined it's all of them. Or with those maybe we don't know or we struggle to understand. And with the world that is just full of things that truthfully are hard to accept. And this is why Kṣānti is so essential on that bodhisattva path that we've been talking about. Because the bodhisattva path asks us to keep widening the circle of care. Not only when life is flowing, or things are easy, or the growth is obvious, but right in the middle of the unfinished and difficult and beautiful and messy and complicated life that we actually have. And to me, this is the heart of Kṣānti. That learning to stay with the parts of life that we might most want to reject or hurry or fix or push away. Again, not because we stop having preferences, but because we start to see that what we fight or reject tends to lead to suffering. While what we can include opens us to more steadiness and honesty and care. And of course, nature teaches us this in so many ways, but the example that's been most present for me as I've been preparing for this session is lichen. So at first glance, lichen can be easy to miss. And in case you don't know what that is, it's this kind of pale green or gray, orange, sometimes yellow crust that's usually seen on stone or wood. But when we look more closely, and when we learn a little about it, we discover a life form that's pretty extraordinary. So lichen is what's called a composite organism, which means that it's a living partnership between fungus and algae. Sometimes a couple other tiny life forms join in and they come together as one living body. And it grows in places that often seem anything but nourishing. So exposed stone, or really weathered bark, or old wood, or even the cracks between surfaces. And it grows slowly, and I mean very slowly, sometimes less than a millimeter a year. So even a small patch of lichen may represent decades or even centuries of quiet persistence. But it does persist. And lichen has been thriving on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. When I look at lichen through the lens of Kṣānti, I see a powerful teacher. Because it doesn't resist what's difficult, and it definitely does not rush its path to becoming. Lichen grows in relationship with the actual conditions it meets. So the rockiness, the decay, the heat, the cold, the exposure. And it's shaped by the surface that holds it, and by the weather and the ecosystem that surrounds it, but it is not consumed or deterred by any of them. Through years, decades, centuries, millennia, lichen keeps growing, slowly but surely, a little bit at a time. And over that time, the patience of lichen doesn't only shape its own growth. On stone, lichen can help weather the surface, so slowly beginning the long process of creating mineral-rich soil. On bark and wood, it helps hold moisture and it creates tiny habitats, and it becomes part of the larger web of life supporting many species of fungi and insects and other organisms in the ecosystem around it. So to me, lichen offers us just one living image of Kṣānti. Not patience as passive waiting or endurance or resignation, but patience as the capacity to stay in relationship with what is hard and what is slow, what is unfinished and imperfect, without turning away and without giving up. Lichen reminds me that the pace of growth is not the same as the value of it. And I'll tell you what, my friends, that's a lesson that I need to learn. Sometimes growth looks like letting the real conditions of our life shape the path and simply continuing a little at a time to widen at our edges, just like lichen does. So Kṣānti, as lichen teaches it, definitely is not about waiting for perfect conditions. It's staying in relationship with what's here. It's widening and adapting and continuing a little by little by little. And it's trusting that even slow, almost imperceptible growth can still serve the well-being of the whole. And alongside that image, let's make this practical in a human context, okay? So how do we tend these conditions in ourselves? Perhaps the most immediate way is to notice when we have become contracted. So when we feel the urgency and the bracing and the insistence that things should be different, so impatience, we pause right there. And after that pause, in the space of that pause, we can take a breath, we can make some room, and we can remember that whatever it is we are feeling, however real, is not the whole story. So this is the essential movement of Kṣānti, to pause and to widen. And to get a little more specific, what supports us in making room? Because I'm aware that sometimes phrases like that can sound a little bit abstract, okay? So curiosity helps. Not curiosity as analysis or trying to figure it all out, but the simple willingness to let ourselves wonder, what else is here? Or can there be more to this story than what I am telling myself? softness helps. So even a small softening in the body, in the jaw or the belly, it just helps remind that whole body, mind, heart complex that we don't have to brace so hard against this moment. We can soften and just start to meet it as it is. Rest helps because a depleted body, heart, and mind contract more easily. So caring for our capacity, not a separate practice from Kṣānti, it is a really important part of what makes patience possible. And compassion helps. Compassion for ourselves when we are impatient, and compassion for a world that is unfolding through countless causes and conditions, often without a whole lot we can control. And rather than some grand recalibration, as Lichen taught us, we can practice this a little bit at a time. So just a little curiosity when reactivity starts to ramp up, or a little softness when the body has become tight, or a little rest before exhaustion sets in, and a little compassion to remind us impatience is not a failure of practice, my friends. It is a place to practice. And it's part of being human. It's just part of the deal, pre-installed. So over time, these small choices make a big difference. They help us keep growing in relationship with real conditions rather than hardening or fleeing or trying to force our way through. So as we kind of bring these threads together, we might understand Kṣānti as the capacity to meet what is here without pushing it away or forcing it forward or letting one part of the moment be all we see. So it's patience with timing and patience with complexity and the practice, the lifelong practice of staying in relationship with life as it actually is. So as we turn towards our practice today, the invitation is simply first to notice where there is impatience in our lives, get familiar with it in the body, and then explore what helps to soften and widen in the direction of Kṣānti, just a little bit at a time. Okay? So let's practice, my friends. And I know I've been speaking for a good while, so I'll invite you to prepare the body for a period of stillness. And do what you need to do to tend to yourself. So stretch, drink of water. Feather the nest. So if you need a blanket or a pillow. And when you're ready, just settling in, and you might close the eyes or soften the gaze. And we'll begin just by noticing that you have a body and it is breathing. And without changing anything about it, just really tuning in to the symphony of sensations and movement that are the breath. So getting familiar with what it's like to be in this body, breathing this breath, and this one. And again. And drawing the attention now to gently scan through the body. And just inviting some softness or loosening of anything that feels like it might be ready to let go, even if it's just a little bit. Noticing the places that the body is in contact with the surface beneath you. And remembering that the earth is always there, holding all the parts of you. And seeing how fully you can let yourself be held. And now gently bringing to mind a place in your life where there has been impatience. Some place where something, someone, or maybe some part of you is not moving in the direction you hoped or at the pace you think it should. And not the most overwhelming thing, but a situation that feels familiar and workable. And as you bring this into your awareness, begin to notice what happens in the body. So where does impatience live? And how does it show up in a felt sense way? So maybe tightness or heat. Maybe a leaning forward, pushing away. And not judging it or trying to change anything, just noticing. And getting as familiar as you can with the felt experience of impatience. And now sensing if you can make a little room around this experience. So not trying to force patience or talk yourself out of how you feel, but allowing this sense of tightening or impatience to be included in a larger space of awareness. And to do this, you might sense what condition or conditions would most support that opening quality of Kṣānti right now. Maybe a little curiosity, softness, maybe rest, or compassion. So for the next few moments, just letting yourself sense and explore what is most needed, and then offering that to yourself a little at a time. And as you explore this, continuing to pay attention to what's happening in the body. So as you bring in curiosity, compassion, rest, softness, what happens? Maybe there's a sense of a little more space, a little more steadiness, more calm. Just paying attention to this unfolding. And if it feels supportive, maybe offering yourself one of these phrases. or any that really resonate with you. May I meet this moment with patience and care. May I allow growth to move at its own pace. May I stay connected to the wider field of life. And now, letting go of any effort, I'll invite you to widen that field awareness as fully as you can. And just sensing yourself and any remaining tightness or resistance or impatience as part of a larger space of presence. And taking a moment just to rest in that vast, open field of awareness itself. We'll close with the words of Rainer Maria Rilke. Be patient towards all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. Like locked rooms and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. So really taking your time, emerging from this practice in the ways that serve you best. Maybe some deeper, fuller breaths. Opening the eyes slowly when you're ready. Thank you for your practice.